Welcome
Yeah.
to the midterm advice from the Genetics and Evolution Coursera. We're joined by our very own CTAs today. I hope you'll get some good advice for the upcoming midterm exam, which actually just released about 30 minutes ago. So with some introductions here, and then we'll kind of go over some general advice for taking the midterm exam. And then get into a little more specific questions on each of the weeks that are being covered in the material. But first, let's introduce everybody. So let's start with Iromi.
Okay. I'm Miromi. I first start this genetics and evolution second iteration was my first Coursera course or any online course for that matter. And like everybody else, I was really nervous taking it, and it was difficult. But I cleared through and was glad to return as a CTA in the third iteration, and also now in the fourth iteration. Uh, at the moment, I'm doing my Masters of Science in Molecular Biology. That's about it.
All right, Brian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Brian Schwartz. I'm in Columbus, Georgia.
I think he's having technical difficulties.
A little bit. Okay, Aishagul, do you want to go ahead and introduce
Took
yourself?
the course initially. I actually teach genetics, and so I wanted to see how another professor teaches, especially in the online format, but also to learn a lot of the evolutionary genetics, which is not really my area. So I've enjoyed the course a lot, and serve as a CTA to try to kind of give back for the benefits that I've received.
Great. Aishagul, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, hi. This is my third time in the course, and I took the second iteration, and it was my first MOOC, and it was my first online genetics course, and it was really, really, really difficult for me. So I really sympathize now with the people who are doing this for the first time, and I'm going to try to do my best to give them tips and advice that I benefited from when I took the course for the first time. And I work as a freelance interpreter in Turkey, and that's about it, I guess.
And I guess I forgot myself. I'm Blair Anderson. I'm a PhD student at Duke University, so I'm the sort of on-site TA for the course. I probably have the least experience about the Coursera course out of everybody here and all the other CTAs, but I sort of manage things on the back end to make sure all the problem sets are sent out on time, and the forums help with forum management as well. But thanks everybody. You guys probably know the CTAs. This is a volunteer job, and they're also volunteering their time right now to help you out with some midterm advice, so we thank them very much. All right, well, let's get started. Like I said in the forums, if you students have any questions during the Hangout, you can tweet us, which, let's see if this works here. You can tweet us at our Twitter account, which is GeneEvol_Duke. Yeah, that kind of comes up there. So that's our Twitter account. You can tweet us questions there, or visit our Facebook page and just comment on a post. And we'll try and answer questions towards the end. We won't be able to get to everybody's question, but we'll try and answer as many as we can. All right, so I think we'll just start out with some kind of general advice, and I'll go over the format of the midterm just so everyone's aware of it. I would encourage you also to go to the announcements section and read the midterm exam information just so you know the format and everything. So the exam is split into two parts, which are each 10 questions, and each of the two parts has a 90-minute time limit. So the material between those parts is scattered between weeks 1 and 4. So it's not like weeks 1 and 2 are on the first part and weeks 3 and 4 are on the second part. The questions are mixed between both parts. You can begin the first part and then wait, a few days to take the second part. But as soon as you begin, say for part 1, then you have 90 minutes to complete that portion of the exam. I think that's kind of. Is there anything else I'm missing from the format that anybody can think of?
The countdown, maybe. The 90 minutes.
There's a countdown? Okay. Yeah, so again, if you have any questions about that, but we'll start out for just some general advice. So I guess I'll ask you, how did you study for the midterm or prepare for it? Sort of specifically, like did you rewatch all of the lectures, or how did you take notes, or how did you prepare your notes for the exam? Anybody can answer.
Well, what I did was I obviously watched all the lectures and I noted down the key concepts and formulas in a notebook. So if something comes up and I can't remember anything, I can either look at it or I can look at that particular video at that time, because there's enough time to do that. So that's one of the major things I did.
I think we might. Aishigl, did you have anything specific that you did when you prepared for the exam?
Yeah, well, other than watching the videos, actually I watched the videos over and over again because it had been more than 20 years since I took my last biology course. It was in high school. So I had to go over everything, even the most basic concepts, and I was constantly Googling something. So, for example, the course page, I think it says you need 2 hours or around 2 hours a week to work on the course, but it took me, I think, around 5 or 6. This is embarrassing, but it took me that long. So the initial study period was around that time, but then when I got to the review, I tried to focus more on what kind of questions there would be. So I was trying to ask myself, rather than just reviewing the concepts, like there are 4 sections, 4 weeks. So what kind of mathematical problems would I ask if I were Mohammed Noor, for example, from week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4? So I actually came up with about 12 or 13 questions like that I knew that those would be the ones that would be asked. And I redid the problems over and over again, so I was sure, I mean, if this comes up, I can tackle this. So when you open the exam, there's actually 10 questions in the first part, and you can see which ones are the ones that you're most familiar with if you've done that. And it's a good idea to just go and tackle those and then proceed with the other ones, because there's no way you're going to guess all 20 questions, but at least you can make an intelligent guess with what some of them will be.
Also, rather than approaching all the questions at the same time, maybe like if you're more comfortable with theory kind of questions rather than mathematical questions, you can do that first and then do the mathematical ones. And also do the easier ones first rather than going for the hardest part.
That's great. Brian, did you have any specific advice other than that for when you took it, or maybe when you guide your students in general for taking big exams like midterms? Oh, can you hear us? I think Brian might still be having some difficulties. So sort of the next question we have is what sort of items do you need or did you find helpful, actually like physical items with you that you had when you took the midterm exam that you would advise other students to have at their disposal?
Well, I
A
had.
note.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Well, I was saying it was a notepad, pencil, and a calculator.
So I really suggest this actually. I had one normal calculator like this because it's more comfortable for me to add up numbers on something like this rather than on a computer screen. But then when you're doing the scientific calculations, this isn't enough. It's because it's not a scientific calculator. People who have one already don't have to use the online ones. But I had two, so one was right in front of me, so I didn't have to change screens. And the other one was the online scientific calculator that I could access as I was doing the exam. And these are actually my notes from the first iteration. So it's cards like these rather than paper, I mean blocks of paper, and I had separators.
Wow.
So it was easy for me to access the formulas and some of the definitions that I had made, and it was, I mean, this works much better for me compared to a notebook. So.
Oh, that's really great advice to have note cards, especially for.
This is the amount. This is the total amount of notes that I took during the first iteration. In the second one, I actually had to take pages and pages of notes because I was trying to approach it from a CTA perspective, like how you would explain a concept. So it was much more detailed.
That's great. And just to remind everybody, you can get like the glossary of terms from the lectures, from the general resources. You can get access to the slides and also the transcripts as well. But that's great. The note cards, great tip. So I think the overall main concern that a lot of students have is they hear the 20 questions or the 10 questions and a 90-minute time limit. So I guess I just want you guys to talk a little bit about the time limit and sort of managing your time for the exam. If you have any other advice in that regard.
Well, 90 minutes is actually more than enough. That's the first thing I have to say. The thing is, it's the way you approach questions. If you think that you are going to take more time thinking about a certain concept or something like that, leave that question. And then go to the other one. You don't have to answer all the questions, but you will have enough time to get back to those questions. And also, usually for me, the questions which has to do with maths take some time, so I do them later. And first time I took the course, it only took me around 45-50 minutes to do one section. But it depends. It really depends on how much you have prepared and how familiar you are with the subject and all that. But the time is more than enough. You'll find out yourself once you open the questions that it's not as difficult as you thought. And it's also the questions that you're familiar with. Like you have done all those questions before. Either Professor Noor has done it during his lecture videos, or you have done it in problem sets. So if you have worked out the examples, it will be quite similar. So you're familiar with the questions and you'll move ahead. Do you want to say anything, Asuka?
About the time? No, I don't have anything to add about the time, but I have a couple of things to say about the approach. Like once you do the practice problems, and once you do the problem sets, you have a pretty much good idea about what's coming. So, for example, if you're asked to calculate recombination distance between 3 genes, and in the videos it says the instructor already tells you, Professor Noor tells you a step-by-step approach to solve the problem. So what I did was I actually wrote that down. First, you add up the total number of offspring. That's the first thing you do. That's step one. And then you look at the recombinants between, say, if it's A, B, C, you look at A and B. And then you add up the total number of recombinants and you get the recombination fraction for that. And then you look at A and C. So I wrote this down step by step. This is how you do it. And that's also in the cards, just so that I don't get confused. Because when you're overwhelmed with so much information, you're bound to skip something, especially if it's new for you. So that was sort of the way I was approaching it. And when you do that in a step-by-step fashion, that it's less likely that you'll be wasting time trying to remember what the approach was to solving the question.
And also, like Lisa would always say, don't panic.
Yeah.
Once you open it, just calm down, take your time, but don't rush it. Just make wise choices, think about each and every question, and go with the answer that you are confident with.
Yeah. And it's important to have a quiet space to work this on your own. So you have to be really careful about what time of the day you're doing it, because you only have one chance. And when you sit down, it's 90 minutes, and if you don't use up that time, then it's over. So you have to make sure that you switch off your phone and make sure you don't have any other distractions, and then I tried to clear my table as best as I could, because I need a lot of space when I'm working on something. So neither any physical distractions or anything else.
That's great. We did have one kind of question come in. So if the student says if they had problems with the questions in the problem sets and they really didn't find the discussions forums to answer them, should they go back and rewatch all the videos to ask, or is there a different way that they should sort of approach that type of question?
The best way is to rewatch the videos, because all the concepts are explained there. Everything that you need will be there. So coming from Professor Noor is the best way. That there can be confusions when you try to go to other sources. So to have a clear and one concept in your head, best way is to watch the videos, and if you want some extra help, you can go through the discussions and again.
Great.
Yeah, can I just add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
It's and we talk about watching the videos, reviewing for the exam, but it has more to do with how you watch the videos. So if you're stuck on a specific problem set question, and you go back to that specific time in the video to watch it, you have to take it really slowly, like step by step. Watch it, stop it, take notes. Try to understand what he's doing there, step by step, and then try to somehow reword the process on your own. And then if there's still something that you don't understand, you can actually pinpoint it and say, okay, so I watched the lectures, but it's this specific time in this video that I'm not getting. So can you help me with that? And when you ask a more specific question on the forum, it's you have a higher chance of getting an answer rather than saying, for example, what's recombination? I don't know, just rather than general questions, specific questions tend to get answered better.
Also, it's very important that you redo the questions by yourself. Whatever is done in the lecture videos also, redo it by yourself. That is very important. Like when you're watching it, you might feel like you understand it and you remember how to do it, but you never know. So doing it by yourself is a confirmation that you can definitely do it.
Great. All right. Do you have any other tips or advice about, in general, about taking the midterm before we sort of go into each of the material by week?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to remind everyone that the 90-minute countdown starts when you open the exam, and it doesn't stop if you decide to take a break. I mean, it's it's independent from what you do. So I can't say that enough, because every iteration somebody comes and says, "Well, I closed it, so." And when I try to open it again, it wasn't there anymore. It will not be there if you spend your 90 minutes taking a break. It doesn't. It will not wait for you. So that's important.
And also, when you're taking the exam, try to take a break in between the parts. Take part one first, and then take a break, and then take part two, because each part is 90 minutes, not that both parts together 90 minutes. So it's important, like, you go into the second part with a clear set of mind, rather than being exhausted by doing the first part and then jumping into the second part. In that way, like, you might make mistakes. So you can take a break in between parts.
All right, great. Well, we're going to start to sort of very briefly go over what's covered in each of the weeks 1 through 4, which are going to be on the midterm. And so I guess we'll just start with week 1, which primarily dealt with problems of inheritance, X-linked and single gene models, as well as mitosis and meiosis. And the students on the forums and other places from the problem set, I think students had the most problems with the pedigree problem. So I guess I'll just ask you, how do you approach pedigree problems? Sort of what specifically do you look for to determine, like, the mode of inheritance, for example, and then any other advice specific to pedigree problems for students?
I would read the question very carefully, because there can be important words that are, like, crucial when you're solving the problem. So especially for a student who is whose first language is not English, they have to, like, read the question carefully, and if they can highlight the important parts and start working out the way Professor Noor has taught you. And also do a lot of practice questions before, if you're not familiar with the concepts. That will get you through.
Blair, am I back on audio?
Yeah, you're great.
Yeah, I had lost connection for a while. I switched to a different computer. For determining if it's dominant or recessive, the easiest way is just to look at the pedigree, and if you see an offspring that is affected with a disorder or a condition, and the parents are not affected, in this class that should indicate that it's recessive and not dominant. So that's half of the question right there. And then if it's autosomal, usually you're going to see both males and females affected in the pedigree. If it's X-linked recessive, usually you're only going to see males. And if a female is affected, the father of that female should be affected as well. And that would probably give away then that it's X-linked.
Yes, so you should focus on words like carrier, X-links, recessive, mother and father, all those kind of words in the question. They are carrying crucial information.
All right, great. So we'll jump right into week 2. I don't see any specific questions from students so far. So week 2 got into the recombination and genetic mapping, and from the problem set, most students had the most trouble with sort of calculating map distances, or just we can talk about how you approach a mathematical question in general. So the main problems was sort of calculating how far the disease gene was from a certain marker, or such type of question. So I guess how did you all approach the recombination problems on the exam, or the problem sets before? What do you sort of look for first, or how do you try and simplify it? And then do you have any tips in general for calculation problems, or problems where you have to do a lot of maybe not a lot, but some math to find the correct answer?
I have a suggestion for the ones that involve 3 gene pairs, like ABC, question number 3 on the graded problem set for week 2. It helps me to rearrange those 8 different classes in descending order, so from the highest, the largest number to the lowest. And when you do that, you should have everything lined up pretty nicely. The parental combinations would be at the top, and the products of double crossovers would be at the bottom. And to me, that makes kind of makes the picture a lot more clear to begin with. And it really only takes a minute or so to rearrange them in that way. And I think that would be very helpful.
Also, when you're copying down it to another paper or something, be careful that you copy down the exact information, because simple letters, capital letters, they make a difference. So you might get a wrong answer because you copied down something else other than what was in the screen. So you have to be very careful with that.
All right, great. Any sort of other suggestions of mathematical problems in general? Do you try and write down? I know Brian mentioned he reorders the question, but do you try and pick out certain things, maybe certain terms?
Yeah, I try to see like what the question asks first, because sometimes you can use the simple method, and sometimes you don't have to just calculate the distances for everything. It just asks the middle, what will be in the middle. So you can, if you arrange it the way Brian told, or if you just look at it, you can see what it is, if you're familiar with it. So that will save time, obviously. If you read the question first and then try to understand what they're asking first, rather than jumping into solving it.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
The ones where he has a disease gene that is with markers like A and B, this would be question number 5 on that problem set. Those kind of confused me the first time I took the course. I wasn't used to seeing the data presented that way. You can call that disease gene, say gene C, and then you can rearrange that data in the same way that you would do one that involves A, B, and C. And that's the way I'm used to solving those problems. So that type of a problem where he has a new disease gene that you're trying to map relative to genes A and B, I would recommend just writing that data out in the way that he does the ABC crosses normally, what we call the 3-point crosses. Then it becomes basically the same kind of a problem. It just looks very different when you encounter it.
Yeah, and he does that in the video actually at one point. So first you have only the A and B markers, and you're looking for the disease gene relative to those, and he adds little c, and then the heterozygote. But then in the last part of the lecture, he actually uses the same format that he does for calculating distance between the genes. Like you said,
And also,
I mean. it switches to that format towards the end.
Also, it's important to choose letters that are not confusing. Like some might say, let's say C, ABC, for example. Like C can be capital and simple. That can confuse you because they both look the same.
Yeah,
Those are
that's a good
small
point.
things that you have to be careful with.
All right, great. That's really good. Anything else you all would like to say about the week 2 material in general before we go on to week 3?
Before the exam, before you attempt the exam, try to work out a question so that you are familiar with it. Even though you're confident, just work it out. It won't do any harm.
Yeah, I think I'd like to mention something. I don't think this is something that's seen across all the videos, and it's not specifically covered at one point. We use it again and again. It's the test cross, and I think it's important for everyone to look at it across all the videos because we don't have just one type of test cross that we're using. There are several types, and we're using it for something different each time. So it's rather than having sort of a mechanical approach and saying, okay, we have a test cross, and this is the numbers we get. Let's just plug it in the formula and get something. It's important to try to understand what is a test cross. I mean, why are we doing this? And what are we crossing in the F2 generation, for example? In the F1s, we know what we're crossing, but I mean, what's the F2? So it's different every time it comes up. So I think we have to look at that and try to sort of give a verbal account of what a test cross is, rather than just taking it as a mathematical formula of doing something.
That's
I
an
don't
important point.
I don't know if that means anything, but it's I found that quite helpful because I think so far we've done test crosses in the first batch of lectures, in the second, and the fourth. I think it's only week 3 that we haven't done it. And every time we do one, it's different. So it's important to understand the difference between the different test crosses we have.
Yeah, that's great. Each question, sort of, as Aromi mentioned, too, you want to make sure you know exactly what information you're looking for, and to know what a test cross is and what it can tell you is important to find the correct answer. So before I go on to week 3, we just had a general question. One student is just asking. I guess they're pretty nervous about it, but they're asking how you relaxed or how did you calm down before the exam and during the exam.
I didn't. I didn't because, like I said before, it had been more than 20 years since I took any biology course. And I think it had been more than 15 years since I had taken any exam. So so I was at home. I was supposed to be comfortable, but I wasn't, and I didn't relax. And I don't think it's not necessary to relax. I mean, you don't have to, so long as you have everything prepared. It's
Yeah, I would. Go ahead, Aromi.
No. You can go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, make sure that you are in a place where you won't be disturbed, so you don't have to worry about that, if that's possible. And I would say what probably induced nerves for me the most during this test is that clock that's on the screen. That can be pretty intimidating, and it might be helpful maybe to print the test and work it on paper and kind of be able to look away from the clock that's ticking down on the screen, and then go and enter your answers periodically. But I think if you can, I mean, you do need to pay attention to time, but the clock in your face is actually kind of makes it a little bit more difficult to relax, I think.
Also, talking about relaxing, having a little stress always helps during exam. Not too much, but
Yes.
a little. It
Yeah.
always helps because that adrenaline rush, it just helps. So it's okay to be nervous. It's okay not to be relaxed. Uh, but make sure that you don't have other disturbances, other things to worry about other than the exam. That's the most important thing. And also don't take it in the last minute, like 1 hour before the due time. That will make you really nervous. So it's better to take it early. There are 2 weeks, I think, to go. So take it at a time that you are comfortable with and not during the last minute.
All right, great. We'll move into week 3 so we can finish up here. So week 3, the topic surrounded genetic variation and sort of calculating or looking at mutation rates, complex traits, and then we were first introduced to the GWAS or genome-wide association studies. And these sorts of problems, especially in the problem set, tended to have sort of less math, I guess I'll say, and instead you had to sort of read carefully to find the correct answer. So it sort of tested your knowledge more on whether you knew all of the terms correctly or not. So just a general question is how would you advise students to approach a problem where there's lots of words and you need to pick out the important information? We sort of discussed this a little bit, but how do you break it down, and especially respect to the linkage problems? How do you are there any keywords, I guess, that you look for?
That's a tough question. I know one question you had asked us to consider was how do you find the information that you need? And uh, I worked through the problems again last night with that in mind. And what I find is that I think he doesn't really put in too many extra words in the problems. I don't think he's trying to trick the students and provide a lot of extraneous information. So I think most of the information that's provided is actually relevant to the question. Um, so maybe that will help, that you really, like Aromi was saying earlier, you really do have to pay attention to all the words and everything that's being asked. And you definitely do need to be comfortable with the vocabulary, and there is a lot of vocabulary, so I think attention to that before taking the test will help a lot. Maybe have a glossary printed out or easily accessible so you can look up some terms, but if they know the terms going in, that should help them a lot, obviously.
Also, if you can't think of anything to do with the question, like no answer at all, look at the answers. Sometimes that helps. So, and also, personally, to me, more than the maths questions, these were the difficult ones. And sometimes you never know whether you picked the right answer or not till the results come out. So don't dwell on the question too much. Like one mistake I did was that there was one question which I was really confused with the first time I took the exam, and I went back in the last minute and changed the answer before submitting. I wouldn't recommend doing that. If you have thought about it and answered it, leave it. You have given some thoughts, that's why you did it. So after doing the questions and right before you're submitting it, just changing the answer, that won't work.
Yeah. Obviously, don't leave anything blank. Just pick an answer, and you can go back, mark the question or somehow so that you can go back and look at it if you have time. But don't leave points on the table by not answering questions.
There won't be
I
any
can add
harm.
something about. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was just saying that there won't be any harm of getting the wrong answer. So just don't leave any questions blank.
Yeah, about
So I
yeah.
still, yeah.
About the graphs and the diagrams in the problem sets and the practice questions, I mean, it's important to look at those. I usually imagine there's some kind of a grid system in front of me, an imaginary grid system. So I scan the whole thing, looking for what's on the x-axis, what's on the y-axis, what's in between. So look at the whole thing really carefully before you jump to conclusions, saying like, oh, okay, this is what the answer. You really have to absorb what's going on in the graph or the diagram before you can answer the question. And the only way to do that is to look at it really carefully and not just jump to answer it.
Actually, like Brian said, if you print out the questions, you can actually draw lines and using a ruler and look at it that way also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I haven't taken many online courses, but I've taken a lot of midterm exams. And one thing I tend to do with sort of wordy problems too is I'll actually look at the choices like Iromi mentioned, and I'll start by crossing off the ones that I know are incorrect, and sort of that limits my choices as well. And going back to the time limit too, like everyone has mentioned, 90 minutes is sort of more than sufficient. So especially with wordy problems, if you choose what you think is the correct answer, make sure you go back and reread that question and make sure your answer makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I
Go
add?
ahead.
Yeah. With these word problems, oftentimes they're describing some kind of a cross or something like that. Try to go ahead and diagram the cross using the symbols like big A, little a, and whatnot. You know, actually diagram it the way that he diagrams them in the lectures. And so try to represent what's described in words with those symbols. That takes practice in order to be able to do it quickly enough on the exam, but definitely practice doing it that way and approach it that way. I think that's probably the biggest or most important step in solving problems like this is just taking the words and putting them into symbols and diagrams.
And that will also help when you diagram it, like Brian said, it will help when you're rechecking your answers. So you can see what you have done. Also, it's important that you check that you have marked the answer that you got, because sometimes they're all close together, so you can click on preceding or succeeding answer. So it's important to check that.
Good point. I did that last night on one of them, actually.
All right, well, we'll move on to week 4, which looked in at genes and the environment and how that interaction occurs. Also heritability calculations and looking at population growth. So this is where you definitely needed equations for some of these problems. So kind of similar to what I asked you guys about week 2 material. But how do you approach these types of problems? Did you all make sure you had all the equations written out next to you? And then any general tips with the heritability calculations, maybe looking at a specific trait that's carried through the F1 and F2 generations?
Yeah, you definitely do want to have the formulas written out and handy, so you don't have to, you don't want to have to try to remember all of those. Some of them, one of them at least, is pretty complicated, I think, and I can never remember it. But I made sure that I had that one written out and ready to go, because I figured that's the population growth one. Practice that one, taking natural logs on your calculator and stuff like that. And then there was a lot of discussion about the problem that had the graph. I'm sorry. There's a lot of discussion. Yeah.
The correlation one, I think.
Yes, there was a lot of discussion about whether you needed to take the correlation coefficient or the slope, and if that was the same thing or not. Doesn't matter if it's the same or not. What you need is the slope of that line. and that's what you need to answer the question. So don't worry about correlation and whether or not it's the same as a slope. All you need is a slope, and that'll help you to answer a question like that.
And also think of it as a simple formula where you have to apply numbers, and don't think like how to derive this and all that. Just think of it as a simple formula. Depending on the question asked, apply the formula and get your answer. Don't complicate yourself too much as well. Sometimes answers are simpler than you think.
All right, great. Do you guys have any other sort of last thoughts or advice about taking the midterm exam before we sign off here?
Well, it's always easy when you have done it and then you're telling it, but uh, go for it. Don't be scared and postpone it. Uh, Go for it, do it, relax, try to relax, try to have not many distractions, and revise. And if you are okay and confident about what you are doing, go for it. Don't keep it till the last minute.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should take it at least the day before it's due, and just prepare as much as you can by then, and then go ahead and do it and get out of the way. It's no good to wait until the last even few hours, because all kinds of things can happen and keep you from completing the test, and with no way to make it up. So get it done the day before for sure.
All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We hope this was helpful, and like I said, I'll upload this recording and provide a link for you guys to watch later if you'd like to do that. But thank you very much, and good luck on the exam.